This is the third session recorded from today, and this is a session of question and answer, and Kate Moore and David Britton are very kindly with us once again, and they will be fielding your questions, but I'm sure sometimes they'll deflect it back to the rest of us and ask for our views on the various topics that we raise. And I think we should start with the present moment. We'll go on to what will happen after September later, but let's start by talking about now, because it seems that there are four possible practices, or a combination of them, in terms of online church communion. And one practice is not to do it, and that's understandable. And some churches are offering service of the word by various platforms week by week. So personally, I haven't received or presided at communion since lockdown, and I won't until everyone, or pretty much everyone, in the benefice that I'm part of has a chance to receive it. Second is to live stream communion. Kate has already said that she doesn't find it easy to watch other people live stream communion when she doesn't receive, and I feel that. But for others, that is really comforting, and they do find it helpful. Third possibility is the prayer of spiritual communion, and we'll finish with that at the end of today, which is a prayer that says, in effect, I know I cannot physically receive communion, but spiritually I do so now, Lord Jesus. And then fourthly, there is the love feast, which is not, and needs to be stressed, is not a sacrament, but is a way of interconnecting households and asking people to have some food and drink. And some churches specify bread and wine, and some just say food and drink, which everyone eats together in remembrance of Jesus gathering with his disciples, as we did at lunchtime. So can I ask Kate and then David, what is your practice and your congregation practice in terms of those four things, and what guidance would you give us about now and communion?
At the cathedral, we start with a communion service tomorrow. So 10:30 tomorrow, there is a communion that Bishop Peter is going to lead. People will be able to receive bread, but not wine. But I think the cathedral's learned an awful lot about the value of streaming things, and particularly morning and evening prayer have been hugely attended by all sorts of people. So I really can't wait until 10:30 tomorrow to be at a communion service, and I know, in the weeks to come I will get to preside. I just can't bear it on screen. It's not, I know there's all sorts of theology about it being fine, but to me it's a real thing. It's not a thing to watch on a screen. And I'm probably completely wrong, but that's kind of where I'm feeling at the moment. I just don't like it on screen.
How about yourself, David?
Hi everyone, nice to see you again. I've got a different computer, so I can see you all now on gallery view, so that's nice. Good question, very good question. Where do we sit? Well, we've, as I explained earlier, we haven't done communion in the church during the lockdown, so I haven't received communion, and we're debating when we can do that. And as mentioned earlier, how can we do that in a way that is inclusive for everyone? Yeah, I think I'm with Kate on this one about watching on the screen. tuning in my personal experience with the Maundy Thursday service, lovely service, but I didn't feel like I was participating in a communion service with Bishop Stephen. Yeah, there is some kind of distance there, which is just not there when you're there in person. What I have done, which is one of the things something that you didn't actually mention, but I suppose it might be more along the lines of a love feast, is we did do what I just referred to as a breaking of bread in your home. So I encourage people to get some bread and get some wine, and we broke bread together. I intentionally didn't call it communion, tried to steer away from that. It was after Easter, the Emmaus Road reading, so the fact that it tied into the readings was why I did it, and people found it helpful. People did appreciate it. So just navigating the future, we're not going to be back in our church until September, so we're going to weigh out the situation and see what it will be like in terms of the numbers of people coming, as to what kind of service we do. We're minded to transition and still stick with our online worship for as long as possible while people are still shielding. In terms of seeking guidance, I think I will seek probably most guidance from the congregation and what they feel is helpful for them. Interestingly, we had a chat in our deanery about it, and different churches are doing different things. And I think some churches where the Eucharist is much more central in the life of their worship, they found it helpful to come back in church as soon as possible. They found it helpful to have that kind of service streamed. This is congregation members have found it helpful. So I'm personally guided by really the needs of the people that I'm under my care.
No, thank you both very much. Now, other questions? Do just unmute yourself and ask.
There's been lots of reference by all of our speakers about when they go out to different churches and the different churchmanships and who's there and who's not there, etc. Are there sort of a set of key questions that they would advise that we would ask beforehand, so we were as prepared as possible?
I think the main thing for me has been asking them what they give the congregation to use. So do they have a weekly service sheet? You kind of need to know what the congregation have in front of them. And also I just always check, does somebody do a reading? Do you have somebody that will do the intercessions? And just finding a little bit about the congregation, what kind of size it might be. Because it's quite hard if you turn up and they don't have an order of service. So I'm quite lazy. I always take the cathedral's parish order of service with me for whatever it is that day, because then I've got the collect, I've got the post-communion prayer. It won't have the right hymns, but it'll certainly have the right readings. So it's just making sure have they got a text for you to use? And is there a toilet?
Absolutely.
I was told in one church that they'd been peeing in the bushes for hundreds of years.
And what should I wear is a really important question. Yeah. Because sometimes people say just the normal or just the usual. And of course, nobody knows what they mean by usual.
And don't believe them when they say to you, we do it like everybody else does.
Yes,
they don't.
Exactly. I mean, my great memory of this is seeing Bishop Laurie preside at Church of the Holy Spirit in Widford. Bishop Laurie is the previous Bishop of Bradwell but one, and very much of an Anglo-Catholic tradition. And Church of the Holy Spirit is Catholic, charismatic, evangelical, and at that time, the vicar did not wear robes, including a dog collar. And before the service, you could see Bishop Laurie feeling really out of his depth, because he had an open neck shirt. He didn't wear vestments, didn't have his hat, he did have a purple shirt, but he took the dog collar off and and had an open neck shirt ready to preside at communion. And you could see he was hating it. It wasn't his thing at all. And then as soon as the service started, he just clicked on some interior light. And from that moment on, he was utterly with it. And you would think that he rejoiced and looked forward to celebrating the Eucharist in a place where no robes are worn and there's a praise band just by his left ear. And I think that's really significant. It's not about us. We only do what you can do in conscience. I'm not saying go against your conscience, not at all. But it isn't about you. It's about these people encountering God. Right. Another question.
I've got a question. David, you mentioned something about using prayer, or one of your churches before using prayer H because it was a short one. I know that wasn't the only reason, but the A factor. And I was just thinking, I wonder if either of you have had any experience of or celebrating communion in particularly deprived areas where perhaps reading, like literacy is an issue, and concentration due to addictions or stuff is very short. So I just wonder if you've experienced or what you could say if to somebody who might imagine doing something like that, of how not to be illegal, and also have you got any wisdom or experience, really? That.
Good question.
Thank you. So good question. Yeah, I was kind of being slightly tongue-in-cheek, but yeah, you're right. It is short, and for me, it's certainly out of the prayer options. If we're doing an all-age service, it seems to be the one that is the most inclusive out of the ones that are there. I mean, that's a very good question. I think you've touched on something which I think is a challenge to the Church of England liturgically. You know, is our language accessible to everyone? How do we use our language? Does it speak to people? I'm not going to come up with the answers now, but I think these are all really good questions. Have I had any experience? I haven't had any experience of presiding personally in that context. I have been in times where we've come to communion, and for various other reasons, basically it's just been the words of institution that have been said. I don't know whether that would classify as a proper communion service, but that's what the vicar did at the time. So it was very short, and that was for practical reasons at that particular moment in time. If you're wanting to be legal and not quite sure, don't refer to it as communion or the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist. Just say we're breaking bread, informal breaking of bread. So I now do that for have done that for the last 3 Maundy services, Maundy Thursday services, where I've done a kind of a reenactment of the Passover, but looking at some of the, the Jewish understanding of bread and looking at herbs, and I've been very clear that this is not a communion service, but we will be breaking bread, and we'll be doing it in a very informal way.
Can I make clear that a love feast, which is what the Church of England calls it, is an appropriate liturgical form within the Church of England, even when we meet physically. That it's not just an online thing, although it's become more popular while we've been online. Love feasts are not naughty. They are legal within the Church of England, but as David said, we need to make it really clear that they aren't communion. Yeah. Okay, another question from somebody.
I was going to say, Lizelle, talk to David Beals. Have you met David Beals? Lizelle?
I don't think so.
You don't know him? I'll communicate details to you. He's done lots of work with people who you're talking about, the outsiders, and he used to do a lot of work with them with DNA. He doesn't work with DNA anymore, but he's had lots of experience.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you.
And following on, I have a minister in Goodmays who she comes up. She covers the parish. She's the parish minister for Goodmays, Reverend Janet Buchan, and she has adapted a communion service that she brings into the mental health hospital. And, you know, I'm sure she includes everything she needs to include, but she does it, you know, she prints off the booklets with larger writing. She often brings visual aids and, you know, items for us to, you know, to touch the senses as she's presenting it. And I believe she does it beautifully. She presides beautifully at the hospital, yeah, in one of our faith rooms. So I think there are ways that it can be done very well. Brilliant. And adapted for the vulnerable, for people who are more vulnerable in particular, yeah.
Let's take a couple more questions.
Just following on from some of that, just a question around inclusivity. That one of the big problems with communion is alcohol, and that automatically excludes anyone in recovery from addictions.
Yeah.
So just love to hear any of your thoughts on that or your practice on that. In my last church, we switched from offering non-alcoholic to offering alcoholic as an alternative, so that the default cup was non-alcoholic. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we make sure no one is excluded in that way.
Thanks, Dan.
You
Good.
want to start, and then David?
Yeah, good. Good question. Well, when I arrived at St John's, it was just alcoholic, but we now offer non-alcoholic as well. But yeah, interesting approach there, going from offering alcoholic to the default. Yeah, that's good. Good thought there.
I think at the cathedral it's simply alcoholic, but it's treating people with dignity. So the people that choose not to receive at all, it's just we kind of know who they are, and it's just acceptance and letting people decide for themselves what they want to do and honouring their decisions, really.
Well, so gluten-free wafers is also worth thinking about as well.
Yeah, we have those.
One thing that I found, just to butt in a little bit, one of the churches I've been at, which I thought was very helpful in terms of providing the opportunity for alcoholics to have communion and dignity in a very special way, I thought was,
yes.
They used to have, on this side we will have gluten-free wafers and non-alcoholic wine, and on this side, again, it depends on space, but on this side we'll have alcoholic and gluten-free. So negative is you get, if you're an alcoholic, you necessarily will have gluten-free bread, but it's sort of for those who are new in the journey or aren't ready to come public about alcoholism or whatever, they could just be gluten-free. So I love seeing that. So I share that in case it's an idea for someone else, but I love that.
I think one of the problems with recovering alcoholics is that if they're anywhere near alcohol, there is a temptation to so I do believe that, you know, we should be offering non-alcoholic to everybody. You know, I mean, that's my view on it, but I have worked in that field, so I'm aware of people who go to church, either are very tempted, and for some it only takes a little drop of alcohol, and have lapsed. And I've also come across people who just don't receive because they don't have non-alcoholic. So I think it's a very sensitive subject.
Yes.
And we need to make...
Just to follow on a question on that then. Tanya, totally agree. I think, you know, the right is there for everybody. But how does that work, say, liturgically, canonically? Because we say we share the bread and the wine. So if we're not offering wine as the blood of Christ, what actually is it that we're doing?
Well, it's offering grape. It's offering, it's offering a non-alcoholic.
Yeah, that's not what it says, is it? And that's why I would like Andy, David, and Kate. Sorry, David, not contradicting you.
I now find myself in the unusual position of me being the person bringing in the canon law rule book, and if you know me, you know that's not my natural bent, but you need to know it. Strictly speaking, non-alcoholic wine is not wine as understood by the Church of England. So if somebody were to receive bread and non-alcoholic wine in communion, they would be, sacramentally speaking, receiving bread. However, the Church of England strongly believes that the whole sacrament is received by those that receive either kind.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so as long as the bread is received, I don't see any problem with one of the stations in the church being signposted as having the non-alcoholic wine. And of course, the younger children receive communion. And in some churches, it's now, although guidelines suggest that 8 is about the right age to be admitted to communion, there are churches in the Diocese of Chelmsford that admit children to communion as early as 3 or 4.
Yeah.
For them, non-alcoholic wine or grape juice does seem to be the appropriate drink to give alongside the consecrated bread. And receiving in one kind is receiving Christ. So,
absolutely.
So that seems to be the answer to all of that. And of course, David's comment that he feels uncomfortable as the only person drinking the wine, and it does seem likely that when we meet physically, it will still be forbidden to use a common cup. But it also, well, strictly, you should not preside at a service of the Eucharist where wine is not used. So you shouldn't really have just bread on the table. And then, you know, because then what happens with the part of the Eucharistic prayer that mentions wine? So I think what I'm saying is it's really difficult to think of a way that doesn't involve the president only receiving the cup for the time being. But I can completely see why David finds that uncomfortable, because that makes the priest a more elite receiver in a way, but I think it has to be done.
Can you buy pre-intincted wafers? So in that way you've got bread and wine, but without a COVID risk.
You can.
I don't know.
Yes, you can get wafers with a dot of wine in the middle of them. They're usually used for, but you can get them.
Jammy Dodger.
Little seals.
Okay. Well, that's a really good thought, but not one had ever occurred to me. Yeah, I guess that would be all right.
I do like the idea of a Eucharist of jammy Dodgers, though.
And you can get the little ones, can't you? The little pots for hospital that we use, the little individuals with the wafer and the wine. But we don't have them. We don't use the alcoholic ones, obviously, in hospital. We're not allowed to. But I think you can get the individuals, can't you, with alcohol?
Yes, you can. They're very expensive, but you can get them.
Yeah, you can get them.
Is that also a denomination issue, though? Andy, what's the rule book?
The rule states that individual cups are not acceptable for the Church of England.
So it's got to be the common cup.
Except the common cup is not allowed to be used at the moment.
No. So we have to compromise.
Aren't they? I think there's an issue with plastic with individual cups as well, to be honest.
Not very environmentally friendly.
Oh dear.
I think that matters. I mean, this is the most holy act. If the most holy act of the church adds to plastic pollution in landfills around the world, or whatever, I think that is a spiritual issue, actually. I think I would rather people didn't receive wine than that receiving wine entailed a massive increase in plastic. But there we go.
When I was at a church years ago, they had these big trays with the tiny little glasses, and they used to fill all the. Used to take a long time, and then I mean, you know, that was another way that they did it.
Yeah, not something.
But it's not the same. It's not the same, is it, as what we do?
I'm afraid.
No.
One more question. Yeah, go for it.
Obviously, sorry to throw like a fairly big question in last, but what does anyone kind of have any kind of either kind of pastoral or personal advice for a situation that some of us, particularly the women amongst us, may find ourselves in going, say, to a visiting church or having a visitor come to our church and make it very obvious that they aren't receiving from us because we're women?
Yeah.
Or not just, or because we're gay or something like that. Not even so much a response to that person, although you may wish to do so, depending on your kind of energy level for that day, but just kind of how you reconcile with that and kind of make peace with it in a way that is, you know, not reducing your own pain or discomfort, but also moving forward. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I've only ever had that happen once at the cathedral, when because we communicate to the congregation around 3 sides, I was on one side and there were 2 male clergy on the other 2 sides, and somebody deliberately sought me out, but then made an enormous fuss and said, well, I'm not receiving communion from you, you're a woman. And I got Nicholas to come over and said, you know, can you communicate to this man? He won't receive from me. And Nick just said to him, I'm really sorry, but if you don't receive communion from Kate, you don't receive at all, because we are an inclusive church. Kate's ministry to you is as valuable as mine. You're welcome to receive from Kate, but if you're not going to, then you don't receive.
Ooh.
And then but then I did cry in the vestry later, because it was
hurtful,
deeply hurtful. But I think happening less and less nowadays. I think it really is happening less and less.
It's very sad.
But having people around you that support you and then will have a few moments of tearfulness afterwards is really useful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh.
Do you accept Reverend Kate?
Sorry?
Do you accept Reverend Kate to say something?
Go for it.
Okay. In my understanding, that man wasn't prepared to have communion with you and those in church because he hasn't loved to each other.
Yeah.
And properly, spiritually speaking, when we are start the service for the communion, we are preparing to love the God.
Exactly.
And love each other.
But the dean did explain to the whole congregation what was going on, because there was a bit of a hiatus happening. Okay. And after communion, he said to everybody, you know, if you did notice something going on, it was this, and I'm not having it. And the entire congregation applauded, because they weren't having it.
And for me, I know that we are out of time, and I'm not deacon, but please accept a question, a general one. Maybe you know, maybe all of us, we know that start to be almost usual in the diocese that a lot of congregation use other kind of wine from fruit, because they say that, you know, in the northern part of Europe, before the wine come, they used to drink wine from other kind of fruit. And I met in the few parishes around, not just here in London as well, using Ribena or other juice. I'm coming from maybe from the Catholic Church, I'm popish, you know. But I would like to hear your Reverend David and Reverend Kate, you know.
We simply use wine. We don't use anything other than wine.
Okay. David?
Yeah, we use wine, you know, the fortified wine is prescribed by the canon law, but the non-alcoholic one is, I don't quite know what it calls itself. It's not Ribena, but it is, yeah, it will be a kind of a grape
juice. It is a proper communion or not? It is hard for me.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
Wine has been de-alcoholized, because I think that a lot of people base it on the fact that it's great. So you can have wine that has had the alcohol, it has been alcoholic and then had the alcohol removed.
Yeah.
Yeah, though the Church of England would still not consider it wine,
No.
but yes, it is
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that we are kind of, it's not canon law. Back to Steve and this question about canon law, and I remember when I was asking the Bishop from Southwark at the time about this, well, why do we have canon law if, no one bothers to keep it? And actually, we probably, all of us, from time to time, break canon law. So if you're going to break it with integrity.
I wouldn't be
No, I think before anyone else incriminates themselves, I'm going to stop recording.